Okay, we're connecting to the cloud server. Hello, everybody, and welcome back for episode 2 of our Cleantech Leaders news site roundup. And we have our editors back. We are really excited to have them. And my name is Mike Casey, and I run Tigercomm. I'm the host of this, but the stars of the show here are our editors that cover the sectors that many of you work in. And I want to just go around and do introductions so that if you're listening by phone, you will you'll be able to recognize the voices. So I'll start with, just go in alphabetical order. Start with Jan Brandt of Solar Wake Up.
Jan Brandt, Solar Wake Up. Great to be here, Mike. We publish a daily newsletter of the top news in solar and parallel markets, energy storage, a little bit of EV, anything that impacts the health of our nation.
Heather Clancy with GreenBiz, and we're focused on the world from the corporate sustainability professional's point of view.
Right. Jennifer, I think you're next.
I guess that's me, yes. Am I muted? No, okay, sorry. Jennifer Runyon. I have been covering, writing for Renewable Energy World for 13 years, and now I also write for Power Grid, so I oversee both those publications and then do the content for our annual event, Distribute Tech.
Cool. Mr. Shahan, I think you're next.
I'm Zach Shahan. I've been writing for Cleantechnica for 11 or 12 years, and I think we had a fun trip with Jennifer, like, 6 or 7 years ago in Germany.
A long time ago.
Yeah, it was a while back. But I really respect this group. I think this is a tremendous group of very well-informed people. So I actually personally look to learn stuff from these discussions, which I think is a good, I hope a good endorsement. We focus on all types of clean technologies, but we have these days quite heavy focus on electric vehicles, solar energy, and energy storage.
Darius.
Hi, my name is Darius Sneakus. I'm editor-in-chief of Recharge. All renewables, wind-led, industrial scale, digital first, and we produce a lovely quarterly glossy magazine as well, and run our own thought leaders roundtables, which have all been digital since May this year. So we're very glad to be part of this again. Great group, and look forward to the discussion today.
And we got Catherine Morehouse, who joined us from Utility Dive. Catherine, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
How are you?
Good. We're just doing introductions here.
Yeah, sorry for the technical delay. I was actually on, but just not as a panelist. So I don't know what happened there. But my name is Catherine Morehouse. I'm an editor and reporter with Utility Dive, and we cover the electric power sector broadly. We focus on utilities, but really look at all trends in the sector that impact utilities, which is a lot of them. So
good. Well, welcome all. And one of the great things about having this group is the spectrum of clean economy sectors that you collectively cover in your reporting. And we asked a question when we first met back in April, the trends you were seeing. And I'd like to update that question by saying, what are the 3 biggest changes you have noticed since we last talked in April? Heather, let me start with you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so I would say, and there's a lot more than 3, but these are 3 things that have jumped out. Climate change has now been part of 2 debates in this presidential election, and it has not been in the past. That's a big, big change. So that the awareness, I would say. Secondarily, I think alternative proteins have really had their moment in the spotlight with the meat shortages earlier in this cycle in the spring. A lot of the grocery stores have decided to try, and alternative protein makers have really gotten their time in the spotlight. And then the third thing I will just say is that the corporate commitments to net zero are off the charts as well. Now, triple, I think, from last year. Whether that means actual action is very much to be seen. So many of them are going to rely on offsets as opposed to actual physical action right now. But those are the 3 things that are top of mind for me in this moment.
Got it. Darius, 3 things you've noticed that really jumped out at you since we talked in April.
Well, I think I came out of the oil and gas industry. I wrote for 13 years for Petroleum Economist, Oil and Gas Journal, Offshore Engineer magazine. And so I think, in days of yore, we talked a lot about peak oil. And every year would come and go, and was next year peak oil. Well, BP now says that peak oil may have come and gone. DNVGL and the Energy Transition Outlook says that peak oil, the COVID pandemic effectively accelerated the demise or at least the passage of peak oil by perhaps 5 years. So I think that's obviously a fundamental shift. And you see along with that, the kind of narrowing of the delta between investment or return on investment in renewables, industrial scale renewables, and oil and gas. That's going to be a fundamental shift. So that'll be sort of top of my list. The European Green Deal is obviously. I'm based in Canada, but I've spent the last 25 years in the UK, and even though the UK is leaving Europe, that sets a very clear benchmark for the rest of the world to look at as a potential model for accelerating the energy transition. And I think lastly, hydrogen, growth of the hydrogen markets, obviously, unprecedented. We're looking now at utility scale developments that's anything larger than 1 megawatt, topping 60 gigawatts in development. So again, when you sort of square the circle, what oil and gas needs to really get committed to the energy transition is bridge work, and hydrogen, will be part of that narrative.
Jan, how about you?
Yeah, Heather stole my first one. Climate change in the debates, is obviously that I want to say it hasn't happened in 8 years.
Longer, I think.
Yeah, and but it does still remind us that half of, or some large percentage of the politicians in America still have to be convinced to believe in climate change. We saw that last night, which made me throw some things at the TV. Over the last 3 months, the biggest shift is investing in solar was by far the best thing that you could do for your money. Sunrun by itself is up almost 10x today, notwithstanding. And, they acquired Vivint in the meantime, which closed today as well. And lastly, can't forget, but demand response has gotten from something that no one really talked about outside of the industry, but we got FERC orders, we've got energy crises in California. Demand response is getting its time in the spotlight.
Great. Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm seeing, I mentioned I cover a lot of the utility space, and so we're getting these carbon commitments from utilities that are through the roof. Amazing. SEPA they just participated in a little panel discussion with us, and Julianne was saying that 68% of the U.S. customers are now served by a utility that has a carbon commitment to lower emissions at least by 2050, or to get to net zero by 2050. So it's a huge number. The utilities are really, really stepping up, I'm seeing. So that's the number one. And then below that, Darius, the hydrogen for sure. I'm seeing so much activity in hydrogen and really big name players getting involved in making hydrogen. And I think, again, it's to serve those commitments because they realize we're going to need a way to really store renewables for a long time if we really want to get to net zero. And then the last thing is EV fleet electrification. Fleets, like the whole utility is saying, okay, we're going to do, 100% of our cars will be EV, or our light duty cars will be EV by 2030, and on and on. I mean, so those things are huge for decarbonization.
It's interesting, Jennifer, you talk about those utility commitments, and I remember being, in my past life, I was a professional environmentalist, and I remember pushing against many of the utilities for burning coal that are now leading the charge on commitments to buy renewable energy. It's a sea change from 15 years ago, absolute sea change. Yeah. Catherine, what about you?
Yeah, I think I would start with a change that is actually really recent. I think we're starting to see a change with FERC, I would say. We saw the DER order that was mentioned, and the power sector the renewable energy sector really is really excited about that. And then we just had this carbon pricing conference. And I think for a lot of people that marks a potential turnaround for a commission that a lot of people saw to be kind of on the sides of large centralized generators. And so I think for renewable energy people who are also FERC people, that those are really promising signs. And then to piggyback off Jennifer a little bit, I would say also the utility carbon commitments, but I think what I noticed about that the most is that, you know, we saw last year a lot of utilities making those commitments, but this year we're seeing them kind of double down and even ramp up those commitments and exceed where they were last year. For example, I just covered American, Missouri, and they substantially increased their targets, or I guess decreased their targets, however you want to look at it. But and so I think it's really interesting to see utilities within just a couple of years really saying, okay, we made this commitment and now we're going to go even further. And I think that's giving people a lot of excitement too. And then the third trend is a little bit of a downer, but I think, you know, we saw scandals in Ohio and Illinois, and I think that is really making people question the utilities corporate structure and kind of making people distrust those companies. And it's unfortunate, but I do think that that's really had been a marked conversation changer.
Yeah. For the listeners who aren't aware, the state of Ohio, since we have some international listeners, the state of Ohio, which is a large, important Rust Belt industrial state, our Federal Bureau of Investigations is probing $61 million in alleged bribes coming from First Energy and Murray Coal to a set of politicians and political operatives in the state capital, Columbus, to basically grease the skids to get the uneconomical coal and nuclear plants bailed out. So it's, I think it is, I'm from Ohio. It has a history, a long and unproud history of corruption. I believe this is the largest, just in gross dollar amounts, the largest political scandal we've ever seen in the state. Zach, I think you're last on trends. I didn't call on you yet, did I?
No, yeah,
Okay.
so, yeah, well, first of all, just check on the protocol. If a fly gets on my head, what am I supposed to do with? Should I swat it or leave it there for a couple minutes? Okay, well,
Let
anyway.
it fly out the window.
If you can grab it with your
There we go.
toothpicks, then
Okay.
that will be the best, I think.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things that I'm going to talk about in the next question, so I'll just briefly mention. I think oil is in a bad spot. The oil industry, I think, is where coal was a few years ago, but I'll talk about that next time. And related, EV market share, as we talked about, was looking really good, but it was early in the year. Last year in Europe especially, and it just continues to be really good. So we'll talk about that more next time. But on the U.S. Power capacity side of things, we do have power capacity reports, and renewables are accounting for over half of new power capacity in the United States this year. Solar was, some months like last month that we have data for was 60% of new power capacity from solar. So we're seeing a pretty clear trend of renewables winning in terms of new power capacity in the United States in 2020, which is exciting. And another big one is this week, benefit for doing my homework late. The EU Parliament just passed a proposal to cut CO2 emissions by 60% by 2030 instead of 40% by 2030. That still has to get approved by the Commission, but that's a pretty big increase in CO2 emissions cuts, which would affect the whole market. Bloomberg New Energy Finance's EV expert Colin McCarricker noted that even less than that, 50% would lead to 58% EV market share by 2030 in Europe. So very likely over 60%, and I would say much more aggressively, much higher than that, EV market share in the next 9 years in Europe because of this and other matters.
And speaking of EV growth, I just want to remind our audience here that we are offering a chance to vote on which of our editors has the best background, best Zoom background. Zach wants you to know that he actually is in his $150,000 Tesla Roadster, and
Oh,
he
yeah.
doesn't want to tell anybody. So
No,
never
I
mind.
live in, no, this is the base model Tesla Model 3. This is not the Roadster, and it's not even the expensive anything. It's the base Model 3. It's like the Toyota Corolla.
Here I am trying to create jealousy in your peer group, and because Cleantech will be running away with it, and you're walking all over it, man. You got to be on message. Ever come work for us, you're going to be on message here, Zach. All right, good. And Catherine, as you remember, caught a great deal of grief, and she's really brought her game, except for those of you turning late, Jennifer Runyon she promises several tricks up her sleeve, and you know, it's tough. So this is my kitty, and I think that's a picture of Heather at what, 10,000 feet under the surface?
Not 10,000. No. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 60 or so.
Good. Excellent. Okay. This is perhaps a related question, but the pandemic and recession end, whatever that looks like. What changes have been brought about by COVID and the recession that remain permanent in your eyes, in clean economy or in the way people in clean economy work, big or small? Darius?
Well, my feeling is offshore wind is obviously going to come through largely, undented by COVID. Largely that has to do with project timelines, but what's happened in the longer term, the last 5 years in offshore wind is most will know is the levelized cost of energy has been driven down from 200 euros a megawatt hour to sub 50. And in the process, what's gone from being an experimental technology, but what was treated as an experimental technology, has become bordering on mainstream. So the pickup in China, which is going to outclass Europe single-handedly very soon, but also in Asia, Taiwan, Japan, Vietnam. If you're following the UK news feeds, Boris Johnson has confirmed that the country will build 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, invest hundreds of millions in renewing port infrastructure. Floating wind looks like it could get a gig or two out of in the bargain. So we've often said at Recharge, offshore wind stands the best chance of being one of the key engines of the energy transition, and I think this is one thing you're seeing coming out of COVID. The economic development potential is plain. World Bank produced a report many will have read, which there's a 15.6 terawatt technical resource in so-called emerging offshore wind markets. So that takes everything from Brazil and South America to Turkey and Indonesia, for sake of a few names. And as I say, this kind of matrix of clean, inexpensive power production and economic development, and rebirth of a lot of mothballed port and coastal industry infrastructure. I think combined to make offshore wind really the again have that kind of primacy coming out of COVID.
Darius, at the risk of taking us down a short little alley here, what you talked about offshore wind reminded me of something that Ken Lachlan at Impact's Asset Management helped Bloomberg New Energy Finance write a few years ago. And in that prediction set, they asserted that basically the range of new energy sources driving the clean economy was set. You were going to have onshore wind, solar, distributed and utility scale, some offshore, and that's pretty much it. We had software, battery storage. Do any of you see additional forms of energy scaling at all? Micro wind, geothermal, hydrogen. Anybody want to venture an opinion on that?
I'll raise my hand, Mike, just to say I think geothermal has kind of reemerged as a very interesting, watching brief, if you like, largely again because oil and gas is looking for new places to put its money. So when you talk about Shell, BP, Total investing in floating and offshore wind, Hammer Fish suddenly, geothermal, again, which we've watched for years at Recharge. I mean, There's enough geothermal in Canada to power the country 13 times over, not a single well drilled. But fundamentally, the technology is largely the same as you would find in a lot of land-based oil and gas. If you go deep enough, you're going to hit enough heat to turn water into steam. So it's kind of it's a low-tech proposition. Just a shameless plug, but we've launched an energy transition newsletter called Accelerate. And in our first issue, we had Schlumberger and a few other oil and gas service companies, sounding off the fact that oil and gas has voluminous data on all this deep sedimentary basin structure that again is largely empty and is very hot. And if you can get the right drill stem down there and round a bend and back up, you can turn turbines at high speed. So I do think geothermal will reemerge as something of a force in the overall transition in the next 10 years.
And Heather and Zach, I know you cover a kind of a broader portion of the clean economy. By all means, jump in. But Jan, Jennifer, and Catherine, you're a little bit more power industry concentrated. Do you see any other sources, energy sources, that will scale in the coming years?
I mean, I mentioned hydrogen, and I do believe we are going to see a lot more going on with that. I mean, we've been reporting, Mitsubishi is getting involved, and I believe Shell has a project. I mean, there's very big players that are working really hard to figure out how to create hydrogen fuel cells that can really store excess renewables when we're producing more renewables than we need, and then we can transport it, or at least just store it right there. So I definitely see a lot more happening in hydrogen.
Heather?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I part of the reason I say that is I don't follow it as closely as you, but I do also see that coming out in the shipping industry, right? So that's been a focus for them too. And I think that's an area where there's a lot of work to be done in decarbonization. So I think if those big companies are putting money into it, I think it is a trend that we will be seeing. And I have to say, from readership standpoint, it certainly is an area of interest. Every time we write about green hydrogen, boom, massive spikes.
Really?
So lots of interest.
How does it compare to when you cover EVs, Heather? Is it bigger, same?
The thing that we cover in the transportation space that gets the most sort of interest is not necessarily EVs, but zero emissions fleets. So RNG over there is a big deal because of the infrastructure opportunity. To take your whole fleet, truck fleet and delivery fleet, for example, electric, is a big challenge right now. So renewable natural gas over there is getting a lot of attention in terms of corporate fleet, statements and buys and so forth. So,
okay.
that's.
Zach, you were going to jump in?
I was just going to say it's also a potential technology option for electric zero emissions flight. So there's, I was trying to remember if it's Rolls-Royce or Airbus recently that I covered that's working on that as well. I think it's one of them, but so there's also marine shipping and flight. It's a potential, I sort of defer to Mark Z. Jacobson, Stanford professor of energy and climate matters. And he's left a window open for hydrogen in those transportation sectors. So I think until proven one way or the other, it's a possibility.
Catherine, do you see other energy sources becoming the provider of electrons that utilities use in the future?
I would agree with the hydrogen point. I've seen similar interest from our readers, and I think, that LADWP proposed plant, I think that's really interesting, and I think people really want to see stuff like that succeed. The natural gas plant that they're planning to over time, convert to green hydrogen, and so I think. And obviously there are a lot of different ways to use hydrogen, but that's one application that I think is really interesting. And it's of course hard to say whether it, comes to scale because, we've been talking about advanced nuclear coming to scale for so long and CCS and all these things that it just hasn't happened. So that's why I'm a little bit, hesitant to say I really think this technology, but I do think there is a lot of interest and a lot of optimism about hydrogen and green hydrogen.
What I don't hear you saying, I don't hear any of you saying, is anything about fusion and about tidal and wind. Anybody, if you were betting people, and I appreciate that, you know, at technologies at such an early stage, some of whom haven't gotten to the laboratory yet, that we would, you know, biofuels for planes, for example. I'm not hearing any of you say, you know, I'd put a little mental money down on those sources. Anybody thinking any of those will scale?
I just typically think that solar and wind have gotten so cost competitive that it's really hard for anyone to break in. It just gets harder and harder. I agree. Hydropower, geothermal seem like they have potential, but they also seem like they've had potential for as long as I've been covering this sector. But offshore wind, I think we're counting as mainstream now. But I mean, basically, it's wind and solar are just so hard to compete with. It's like trying to break into the Djokovic, Nadal, Federer Grand Slam competition. Like, it just gets very, very, very challenging, and I don't see anything that's on the horizon for that.
Heather?
Probably worth a flutter on some of the new chemistry batteries, I would imagine. You know, vanadium flow and zinc air, and you know, they're already cost competitive with lithium ion. So you know, it's a scalability discussion now. So, and they also have longer duration. They're cheaper. I mean, in prospect. So although it's not a source of electrons, again, we know that the energy transition doesn't happen without long duration storage. So you know, those are definitely, they get a lot of interest in front of our paywall, certainly on recharge.
Heather, you had something?
Yeah, the only thing Zach said hydro, which made me just remember a number of the companies that are trying to come up with these sort of 100% 24/7 renewable plans, right? Some of them are using hydro as the other option to solar, for example, for the times when the sun isn't shining or they don't have. So there's some interesting deals that have happened that have combined those two sources as a clean energy / renewable kind of play. Just a point. That's all. Just and frankly, IBM actually uses hydro a lot for some of its commitments. So it's interesting. So Jennifer, it's there in the background.
Jennifer,
yeah.
you have any thoughts on this?
No, I mean, I would agree with Heather on hydropower. I don't think that's not going anywhere. I don't see hydro. I mean, it's just a nice, firm, steady renewable that I think will continue for a very long time. The one thing that I would say, which is a little bit, probably maybe a little controversial, but we used to talk about like an all of the above energy policy. And I think there's potential that we might see that with clean energy, with all of the possible technologies. You know, maybe we'll use some wood pellets for electricity. Maybe, you know, I think we'll be trying to decarbonize everything, and we will try all the technologies that we can get our hands on that make sense for that particular location, because I think we'll have to.
That's an important point. Finally, you know, it's been any number of analysts calculate show we can't get there on clean energy production alone. CCUS and the hydrogen will be fundamental to the argument. And one thing I didn't mention, but it just crossed my mind, floating solar. If you saw the NREL study that came out a few weeks ago, you know, by their number crunching, if you put floating solar on all the existing hydro dams on the planet, you've got half the. Let me make sure I get my facts straight here. Yeah, 50% of total electricity demand done in one. So this kind of hybridization of clean energy, I think Jennifer's spot on. You know, it will be all the above because we need all the above. But we'll have to get our hands dirty and do CCUS as well.
And Darius is about to get a flood of hate comments from the boating lobby, but that's okay. Catherine, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just want to put in there that, you know, we saw that UC Berkeley study earlier this year that found the grid could get to 90% renewable energy, and, you know, that renewable energy being solar, winds, and storage. I don't actually remember if it included, I assume it included existing hydro. I actually don't remember. But I thought that study was significant in that when we were doing research for a 5 technology series, which was posing a similar question, what is kind of on the cusp here? What else do we need? And when I was talking to people, a lot of people pointed to that study and said, you know what, this study shows that what we really need is just better transmission, better technologies to ensure that the technologies we do have can do the job of powering the majority of our grid. So I think that's an interesting perspective. And I think when you talk to a lot of people in the space, they believe that. And that's why I think you also see people in the renewable energy space really push for massive transmission overhaul and those massive infrastructure overhauls that can really unleash wind and solar to regions that might be more constrained.
So Jana, are we looking at, do we now have in sight all of the major energy sources of the future that are going to scale?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be a sort of hater on hydrogen here, but you know, when hydrogen got into the headlines when NextEra or Florida Power and Light made their announcement, and the first thing I thought about is because in 2007 they had a mini Austra solar thermal sitting in front of the convention center in Miami, and they did a 75 megawatt Austra system in Central Florida as well. It's just like it doesn't get me excited, especially in the power sector. Maybe in transportation that'll be interesting. You know, when you were talking before about Ohio, Mike, you missed one word, and that's indicted. And the reality is, what you saw in Ohio is not unique. I think if there was a wherewithal to investigate other states, a lot of that would happen accordingly. And you know, I wouldn't make the case so much about one technology versus another, the way that it was done in the West Wing episode. I think anything that works in a bankable, low-cost way is going to be successful. The debate we're about to have over the next 10 years is the value of central versus distributed. I think that's where, you know, and you're kind of starting to see this in DC with this National Clean Energy Trade Association that SIA notably did not join because, I mean, like the reality is what utilities, you know, try to control in the future by making them central and then controlling it versus the reality that we only have 3 million solar homes in America out of 80 or 90 million. You know, what does it look like 10 years from now? I think that's what's going to shape the grid more so than what technologies are on it.
Go back to the question we didn't quite finish, which is if you're a betting man or a betting woman, when the pandemic and recession are quote done, whatever that looks like, the change or 2 or 3 changes you think that have happened because or have been accelerated by this are absolutely permanent. Any other thoughts on this? Zach, if you had to pick one.
Yeah. I thought we didn't start that one yet. So, well, just a brief note on the coal situation. I think there's also an issue of culture of crime in our country that we sort of have to reckon with, that we have to struggle with. The person whose name I'm not gonna is very prominent in that company actually wrote a handwritten, very slightly veiled threat to one of our writers a few years ago, telling him basically, watch out, this is my truck, look out for me. Printed on company letterhead and then signed with his name and handwritten a little bit, the sort of veiled threat. So, you know, I think there's a kind of culture of crime that I think we need to really work on broadly in this country, of getting it out of the influence of power, out of big power. But just regarding the question, I wanted to focus on 2 things. One is oil. We wrote, you know, years ago that the oil industry, the investment world, would sooner or later bail on oil in a dramatic way, like it's done with coal, and just it was very clear. Forecasts from companies like BP and Exxon were wildly like full of unicorns and rainbows, not reality. And sooner or later that was going to catch up. And it's just sort of a sense of, once the investment world saw the end was coming and others saw the end was coming, that the investors would really ditch these companies. And we've been seeing that this year. We saw it at the beginning of the year a bit. We've just seen the trend continue. And I think that trend is going to hold. And I think oil companies are going to be in for a world of hurt. And I think they are really grasping for how to evolve and survive in a world where they're never going to have this kind of centralization of power that they've had. And I said a few nice things about hydrogen potential and shipping and air, but I think it's way overhyped personally, especially for everything. But I think it comes from the fact that oil companies are trying to find some solution that's going to work for them, that they can pigeonhole into the transition. And I think they're just more hopeful than realistic about it. But it does have some niche applications where it might help. But I think that and plastics are a couple places where they're really trying to grow big, much bigger than they are, as quickly as possible, to sort of replace the oil business they know they're going to lose. So connected to that is the EV, like I said, EV market share. We're really at a crossover point with this technology, and it's going to be, I think there's so many things I could talk about with this, but it's going to be a really snowball effect of EVs becoming, growing faster and faster and more competitive. The only potential bottleneck is in the minerals mining sector, but even so, I think we're going to see a dramatic shift. But when you think about going from 2% market share in Europe last year to 10% this year, to potentially 50% in a few years, 2025 maybe, this is going to have humongous ramifications across the auto industry, the insurance industry, the banking industry, the oil industry. So I think it's something to really watch closely and try to learn a little bit from.
Sounds like a robust list.
Yeah, there was one topic that I think I'll try to come back to, but
okay. And I know that Heather's trying to evaluate whether or not she's going to give Rex Tillerson that Green Biz summer internship he's applied for. So just Heather, let us know on the next one whether you're going to grant him that. But Jan, did you have a sense of what COVID recession changes will be permanent coming when we're on the backside of this?
Yeah, I mean, two things unrelated that I think have changed from pre and post, and maybe it's an acceleration with a caveat for a third. One, there's, especially the remote work aspect has been interesting to me. I actually think that companies are going to start stipending home use in a way that we stipend personal cell phone use. Mm-hmm. And the way that manifests is I actually see, why aren't companies basically offering to pay for a solar lease or geothermal lease, right? Like, depending on where they live geographically, I can really see companies that have their own ESG commitment saying, we'll put solar on your roof and we'll pay for it as long as you work for us, and then you can take it over. There's really this home energy use stipend that I think is going to become more and more apparent. On the flip side is the other piece that's really come out with all these corporate and banking commitments. The ESG capital allocation inside big banks is no longer niche. And what I mean by that is LPs, so the investors that are giving these big banks and private equity firms large sums of money, are no longer saying, hey, put $100 million into this pot just so that we look green. They're saying, we want to make money in this energy transition. Here's $5 billion, which means that the CEOs of these firms, which used to kind of know about some solar deal that the firm was doing, are getting involved in the size, scale, and development of these firms. Look for the major banks and major investors of the world to really get into it. And lastly, and this is something I've been saying for years, but never really got much traction, so I'll try here. This is the first time since we started driving cars that utilities and oil companies are competitors, right? And what I mean by that is that when we used to have oil-fired generation, oil companies would supply commodity to utilities, so they were friendly. And that always helped in the state capitals where they were sort of working side by side. On the other hand, your cars were oil, your homes were electric, and it worked for both of them. These majors were never competing legislatively. That's done, right? You're going to start seeing Exxon, BP, et cetera, competing against the monopolies. And so you'll see a trend of deregulation because these companies are going to want to get into the game, because now the electrification of transportation means the utilities get all of the market share that the oil companies have today.
Jennifer, Heather, Catherine, changes that survive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll just be brief. The telecommuting one for sure, and for me that means how do companies tie their renewable commitments to those home workers? How do they account for that, and how do they make that work? Because that's going to be a big thing. I'm actually embarrassed and ashamed that none of us have brought up energy poverty yet. The focus on making this transition equitable and fair and making sure that everyone has a chance to participate, I think that is not going to go away. In New Jersey, that is now built into evaluations for energy deals. That's part of the new changes here. I think New York is moving the same way. So I think that will loom over the deals that get done in the future. I hope that it will be a legitimate and honest and authentic focus, and not just lip service. But that's something I think is not going to just go away. And then the other thing I believe that is permanently changed is the focus on how ventilation, how to make sure that, right? So ventilation that's safe for people. How do you make sure it doesn't screw up your energy efficiency, mandate and so forth? So I think those are permanent changes that will have an impact on clean energy and clean, corporate sustainability strategies.
Well, don't you think too that the focus on HVAC might actually put a lot of attention on the potential for more efficient HVAC that would?
Oh, totally. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Or P.S. windows that open.
What an idea!
Woohoo!
Imagine.
Back to the future. Okay, Catherine, what do you think?
I mean,
I would say that everyone mentioned kind of the working remotely policy, and what that makes me think of is load shift, because what we've obviously seen during this pandemic is a major load shift from commercial to residential. And I just wonder, in a world where, if you really see companies truly in the next decades start to cut down on their office space and start to cut down on using these massive buildings, are we going to see fewer massive buildings, and are we going to see that load really shift to the residential? And then all of a sudden you have more distributed, if you're seeing also an increase in rooftop solar, you're seeing all these homes be their own distributed resources. And then the second thing I would highlight is, we've seen utilities suspending disconnections for homes who can't afford to pay their bills during, a time of real economic turmoil. And I like to think that that's a permanent change, that's something that indicates that utilities are seeing, these customers on the other end are not, I'm not saying they didn't see that before, but, seeing, that there are good reasons sometimes for customers to not be able to pay their bills. And I like to think that that's the beginning of some of what Heather is talking about, of this concentration on really energy equity and of really empathy in that space, and in keeping people's lights on and keeping people's air conditioners and heating and et cetera on.
And Zach, if you need us to call 911 because your car's turned over on the side, you let us know. Absolutely no problem.
Sorry, did something mess up?
You're sideways.
Oh, sorry.
We're worried that somebody came and tipped, the utility guys came and tipped your car over. But Jennifer, changes that survive this pandemic.
I have two very small ones that haven't been mentioned. And one is large. And that is the event industry. I think we as an event company have ventured into virtual events, and I think we've figured it out. Everybody's doing it. I think we're working really hard to deliver great content virtually, and I think we will continue to do that even after we go back to live events. However, I will add, we've also, in doing these virtual events, realized how much we miss these live events where we can really talk to each other. And so that's my background now. I was Distributech earlier this year. So I think we're going to end up with this hybrid model where we will go to some events in person, but we will do a lot more virtually as well. And then just a little tiny subset of that is what we're all on right now, and that's Zoom. I think Zoom is here to stay. I think we'll be Zooming for the rest of our lives now.
That's a real reach there, Jennifer, but we'll put it up on the board for sure. Darius, we got a question for, I think, as always with you all, time flies when we talk to you. We've got 11 minutes left on the panel. And Darius, we had a question from an audience member. How far behind will U.S. pricing be from Europe on offshore wind? Dominion certainly isn't promising Virginia sub $50 per megawatt hour offshore wind. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wholly germane question. We see actually with Dominion's CVOW, this is a 2.6 gigawatt project off Virginia, that they're already looking like they might, some calculations suggest it's going to cost 600 million more to build than what they originally thought. So there is that concern. But I think again, what you're seeing, BP obviously has now jumped in with both feet off the U.S. Through a deal with Equinor for acreage and development rights off New York. When you start getting the Equinors and the BPs and Shell through Atlantic Shores, that joint venture with EDF, the equity they're bringing to bear on this means that the actual ratcheting down on costs should be faster than in Europe. Interesting point was made. I was interviewing Alistair Dutton, who works he works for the World Bank at times and GWEC generally. He made the comment that around the subject of these emerging offshore wind markets, it took Europe 30 years to build an offshore wind industry, and many of these countries could do it in 5. And I think that's very much to the point. The lessons learned, the advances in technology. I mean, there's no question installing a 3 megawatt turbine offshore now, not even a 6 megawatt turbine offshore. It'll all be 12, 13, 15, 20. The infrastructure will go in more quickly because we have vessels that can actually lay this stuff more quickly. The big issue, and not the big issue, but many big issues in the U.S., of course, is still the Jones Act. Hovers over everything. You need to start building first vessels for the installation of turbines and platforms. And then, of course, what shape is the grid in the Northeast? You get stuff to shore, but if you've got Maine's grid, you're going to be in trouble in actually moving much of those electrons around the state. So I hope it's not too circumspect an answer, but my feeling is yes, we know there's a 25 and 30 gigawatt build-up potential by 2030. We know there are billions of dollars just lined up and waiting to go through Ørsted, through Equinor, through Shell, through others. So the economic development potential should really win the day. The power production is a big part of it, but if you want to re-enliven these states in the Northeast and then on the West and elsewhere, offshore wind again has that industrial leverage, if you like, in economic terms.
I have a second question. Zach, I'll direct this at you as you are often the most EV focused among us. Farai, excuse me if I didn't pronounce that name correctly, is asking about the movement to biofuels away from oil. I know biofuels didn't surface very hotly here when I asked you all about trends. Do you have any thoughts about biofuels?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of grasping. There's just a lot of people with a lot of money, a lot of big careers that are trying to find a way to transition, and some fit better into biofuels. Aviation is a tough one, but my inclination is that it's going to be hard to actually. I don't know. I don't really know for the large scale. I'm not gonna speculate, but I know battery costs have been coming down much faster than people thought, and we're just a few years off from small commercial flight being competitive with battery electric airplanes. Large scale, it's a hard toss up between hydrogen and biofuels, but I feel like I would put my money on hydrogen. But this is very hard. The thing I mentioned earlier, that was Airbus I found. And I think they're working on something for 2035. So we're still a ways off from something practical, but we'll see what happens.
Okay. We're 7 minutes out. Let me just ask this question to any of you who feel brave enough to want to answer it. Could I get any thoughts from any of you on the simultaneous expansion in scope of the two leading U.S. trade associations? AWEA is completely reforming itself and dramatically expanding. And it looks like SEIA has taken Solar Power International, what was a 4-day in-person show, has made it to be North American Smart Energy Week, which actually is 6 weeks. So these associations, I think, are expanding with the space. Is this a good thing or is it not? Jan, you've written a good bit about this. Let me just ask you first, and then maybe ask for some others.
Look, whether it's a good thing or not, we're gonna figure out. The obviously, it's unfortunate this year that the events weren't able to be held. It's a huge revenue generator. Personally, I'm glad that SIA stuck by the future, sort of double down on being bought in on the future growth of the solar industry and stayed as a standalone. That doesn't mean that you don't work together with other trade associations. It's just sometimes you have to disagree on what the priority is, especially in legislation. And I think sort of all clean energy associations going to have trouble, internal infighting about what is the priority in a bill where legislators have to pick what stays in and what goes out. Look, the solar industry it's no secret. There's plenty of infighting at SIA by itself between utility scale and distributed, and more and more players coming in with energy storage. This is the second thing that SIA has really created some boundaries on what it stands for. Right, one is not letting utilities in as membership. I think there's always been a big grab to want to go after the money for that. NextEra pays $3 million, or used to pay $3 million a year to the Nuclear Association, whereas obviously that's big money in a $20 million trade association. So let's see how it plays out. And I'm fairly happy, and SIA knows I'm happy about what they've done to date, and I think we'll all come out of it on the other end. That being said, all these energy sectors, the clean energy sector, still doesn't understand that they work in a regulated industry where policy is business development. The amount of money that's being spent on policy inside clean energy and environmental movements is still causing all sorts of issues. We're not paying $60 million bribes to any House speakers, which utilities are I'll let the indictment speak for itself, but I'd like a $60 million national budget for SIA as opposed to like a bribe for this House Speaker.
As Susan Monroe says, say it louder for the people in the back. Reverend Brandt, we like that. Catherine, how about you? There's a viewpoint in some quarters that the gyrations in the association world have been driven by utility interest in getting involved and having more influence. I'm not saying that's accurate or not. Your perspective as someone covering the utility industry real heavily?
I think it makes sense that the utilities want more interest, of course, because you see that play out, outside the trade association, which is obviously why, real time in the field, you constantly see fights over, I don't want to say small rules, but really niche details of regulations that would essentially benefit either a customer-sided generation over utility scale. So I think you see that battle constantly. I think it makes sense that utilities would want a bigger hand there. I would say utilities have a lot of representation. They have EEI, they have APPA, they have NRECA, they have themselves. So it's hard for me to imagine a clean energy association that represented those interests as well when I feel like personally their interests are well represented and at both the state level and the federal level. But I think utilities also, understand that this is where the future is. They see the money there, and they want these organizations who have that knowledge to be working for them. And
good. We have a minute and a half left. Jan, I got a private message from Jim Robo, the CEO of FP&L, wanting to know if you wanted to apply for their VP of Communications Director. Should I just forward that to you, or you just let me know offline?
Jim and Eric both have my number, so they can call me anytime. We'll have an intellectually honest debate.
All right. In closing, scale of 1 to 5. 1, you are quite pessimistic for the next 6 months. 5, you're really optimistic. What's your number and why? Jennifer?
9. next 6 months for clean energy, I'm a 5. I feel like we are motoring, and I think things are looking great.
Okay, Darius.
Can I register 2.5? Just sit on the fence entirely, because I think fundamentally this is no. Okay, I'll go 3.
You're the editors in
by
this
nature.
world. In my world, the editors get to say so. In case you all haven't noticed, we don't have you on here because we see you in a servile role. Just saying.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'll come back then. Listen, well, no, I think fundamentally, look, what we saw through COVID has been very telling, right? There've been lifelines thrown to oil and gas all over the place. It's a dying industry. It needs to reinvent itself in double time. So that's why my pessimism lies in that fact. If the amount of support going to clean energy is half that going to oil and gas with COVID, when there's an opportunity to really, fundamentally, put the foot down on the gas pedal to mix my metaphors. But then you have something like Transition Pathway Initiative, which says, look, we're a group of asset owners, investors that control portfolios with $2 trillion, and we're saying oil and gas ain't anywhere near good enough. So I think there is we have to follow the money, and obviously the more money I see being channeled across from fossils to renewables, then the higher my score will be next time we meet.
Zach, 1 to 5, and why?
Yeah, I'll just take your question and shift. Well, I talked a little bit about batteries, and I just wanted to highlight that I think it's really underestimated and under-acknowledged how much the battery industry is going to help accelerate renewables and electric vehicles. And this, we had a story this week about vanadium flow batteries costs and lithium battery costs, and Elon Musk responded to our article that we were wildly too high on battery costs, which caused a short panic. But I got on direct message from him that their megapack costs are now $200 a kilowatt core and $300 all in, which is really low. I mean, they had power pack costs $770 kilowatt hour earlier this year, under 600 kilowatt hour a month ago, and now he's saying $300 kilowatt hour all in cost for megapack. So I think that and what was shown at Battery Day is going to be really disruptive, not in the next 6 months maybe, but in the next couple of years. And I don't think the market recognizes that yet. So I think that's going to be a kind of revelation, as we've seen with these other industries as they've evolved. But
and I think Zach has just zoomed ahead in the name dropping competition. You got the direct message from Elon Musk. It's impressive, very good.
Yeah,
did not go past me.
After getting smeared a little, after getting a harsh response for getting some, but anyway, I think it's really dramatic. So I'm very bullish.
Heather, 1 to 5, and why?
I'm going to answer this with respect to the clean economy writ large, not just clean energy. I would say a 4, and I'm giving that number. I would be a 5 if I knew the results of the election. Got it. Okay. Catherine?
Good point.
That's very similar. Can you hear me? Okay, that's very similar to my response. I was originally going to say 3, awaiting the results of the election, but I would say that if the past 4 years have shown us anything, it's that the clean energy industry really is doing very well on its own in the market without the federal government really wanting it to. So I think I would give it a 4.
Good. Jan, you get the last thought, and then I'll just want to remind everybody, make sure you vote on our background contest here. No one's at a greater depth than Heather, but no one's got a cooler cat than me. All right, Jan, you're 1 to 5. Oh, and Jennifer with the close. All right, on the motion detector. All right, Jan, 1 to 5.
I'm gonna go 4.9. The reason we're going that high is, to Zach's point, merchant battery operators in Texas paid for their 100% of their capex in one weekend a few weeks ago. So you can't argue about the capex cost about storage when you make your money back in 3 days for a 10-year investment. And then the only caveat, and this is for an offer to make an angel investment that I hope others will join me on, is please someone figure out what to do with my excess boxes that I'm getting for all the things that are shipped to my house. There's an opportunity here that is bad for the environment because too much of that cardboard is ending up in garbage, waste, and crappy single source recycling here in Florida. But come pick it up and make some cool benches or something with it.
All right, I'm going to close with thanks. First off, editors, thanks for coming back again. This is really fun. People love this, and we've gotten really good response. So
Mike, what's your score? You got to give one.
I'm just the moderator. I'm gonna go with a 5 because you all persuaded me on the optimistic bent today, and all 2 members of your fan club, Zach, in the background, are convincing me that there's reason to smile. How's that? I think, but seriously, thank all of you for coming on. This is, I've got competitors who contact me and say, this is so cool to hear from these people, because in our world we're all trying to get in your doors, and now you come through our door, and hearing what you think and what you see is extremely useful to us. So thanks for doing that. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We're going to try to convene this one more time before the end of the year, and pending the editor's schedule. So thank you so much for joining us, editors, and thanks, audience. We really, really appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.